Welcome, everyone. Delighted that we're all together to enjoy, share, respond to the extraordinary art of Mark Davis and his present exhibition entitled All That Rhythm. It's been at least a quarter century, if not longer, that we've been enjoying the opportunity of working with Mark and sharing his work. And I think our inventory shows maybe 987 pieces have come through the gallery in this time. And the pieces primarily in this show, the newer pieces, and maybe 20 earlier pieces are the only ones out of that number that are not in someone's home or in a collection. That's just not normal in terms of galleries where an artist creates a substantial body of work and it finds its way into people's homes and lives. So there must be something about the work itself and the artist who makes it that is a bit unique. And I think we're going to talk a bit about that. But I also want to thank Jim Schantz for being part of this gathering, because it is Jim who introduced us to Mark and Mark to the gallery. And the first quote of Brother Thomas's that I will share is, "When good people meet, good things happen." And this is a wonderful extension of that. So it's a real pleasure just to be together and to enjoy all that rhythm, but also to enjoy art when it produces joy, art when it allows people to engage and feel that they can somehow celebrate each moment of each day of their lives. So it's really a wonderful, life-affirming opportunity that we want to share with you today. Delighted, Mark, that you're here. Caroline, if we can look at the cover piece so people will know that we're actually going to talk about art and not have to listen to me the whole time. That gives you a wonderful introduction, and it's not often when we've done catalogs that we've basically chosen to make sure that all around it is white. Normally we've added a color, picked up a color from the piece itself and so on. But here it just seemed like the rhythm of the piece visually was an invitation to all of us to participate in the joy of the work itself. So Mark, if you want to speak just briefly about this piece and introduce yourself, you're already introduced anyway, and we'll go from there.
Great. Thanks for that. Thanks for that great introduction. Yeah, I've been working with you with Pucker Gallery for it has been a lot more than a quarter century, actually. It was like the mid-90s. And you know, of course, at first I was just as a kid, I was just copying Calder and trying to learn the whole aesthetic and the whole technical parts of making mobiles. But as we get into this period of work, one of the big things I'm trying to do is, how do I describe it? There's an overall aesthetic that in the past, I would actually start a piece with one section that I would get just right, and then I would look at that and decide what to do for the next part of it. So it was sort of almost a collage idea of ideas, putting them together, kind of coming up with a poetry of the whole thing. But now I'm able to just step back and come up with a more complete image that involves all the same things that it's always involved, but it's just a little more constructed in my mind before I even start. That's all I can think of to say. What else could I say, Bernie?
No, we could say next slide, because we're going to come back to this piece and then we'll have other people engage with it.
Great.
I'm actually going to ask Mara if you wouldn't mind just responding first to this piece. And I'll give you a quote that I actually used recently of Thomas's, which I love because it seems to be a good description of Mark, which is jump and then sprout wings.
Oh, that's lovely.
Isn't it?
That's just lovely. Of course, everything Father Thomas says is lovely. It's kind of unnerving to come after him. I want to point out a couple of things in general for people who are seeing this. All of Mark's pieces are dependent and made alive and animate because they move, and you're seeing them just in one static position. And to show that position, they've also, the photographer has a diffuse light on them as opposed to a light that has direction, which starts the whole shadow and the interplay of form and light and shadow that is integral to the artistic experience of these pieces. So I hope everyone can see this piece in motion in their mind's eye, and maybe see not only the 3 dimensions, but that 4th dimension of a moving shadow. So things that are light struck, things that are, and how that increases the volume of the piece. Now this piece is rather small. It's 9.5 by 12 by 9. And it has what we would call a stabile bottom. So Calder did the mobiles that floated in space and everything moved. And then he did these stabiles that were grounded. They were largely outdoor floor pieces or ground pieces, and they didn't have moving parts. This one is actually a combination of the two. You see the stabile with the 3 points anchoring the whole piece, giving it some sort of, legging. And then at the spire point of the black, there is a 2-part movable piece, mobile piece, that will start swinging around the base. So you can see the pivot point up by the big circle. And then you've got this lightning bolt, coming across, or this angel wing, this wing coming across. And it pivots and it moves and it catches the light and it twirls. And I'm going to tell everybody right here, I have a piece this scale. And it is the centerpiece on my table that I live with every day. And I've had it for 2-3 years now. I've saved a fortune in centerpieces at dinner parties by having this on my table. I just want everyone to know. They're delightful to live with, and they move a little bit, on their own just because somebody walks in the house, and so there's a little air. But I just ping one side of it with my fingers, and it lazily spins, or it quickly spins, depending on how brash I am with it. And I am completely mesmerized by this little piece of magic.
Thank you, Marv.
Wonderfully said, Marv. I think we're going to move on to the next piece and ask if, Rusty, you could respond to it. I don't think you need to be quite as eloquent as Mara.
You said I'm not capable of being quite as eloquent?
No, I said you don't need to be. Careful.
I understand. This is another small piece, and we in this webinar are going to see essentially 3 different types of structures that Mark has created. These smaller and sort of medium-sized tabletop mobiles that articulate around usually a sharp point, and then have maybe 1, 2, 3 other points where rotation can occur. We'll also see the typical mobile that hangs from the ceiling, and then what I think is the most remarkable group, and that is the mobiles that hang off the wall, and we'll get to those. This particular piece, if you look at its composition, has something very unique. The 3 little bulbs on the left might be a dog's head, not sure. Could be anything, and that's one of the many joys of Mark's pieces. They have an abstraction to them that allows you to enter that world that Mara talked about, fascinating, interesting, could be a pointed topic, somebody's table where you're sitting around just looking at it. And then as you touch it and it rotates, other things happen. And it's a combination of the particular coloring that's in here, which is we haven't talked about, but it's going to be magical. It is shapes and composition. And then look at this base. This base now Mark has included not just the 3 legs, but a actual piece that contributes, if you will, to both the structure and the coloration. So there's no part of a piece of Mark's that might not be an integral part of the composition itself. So the round pieces that are circular that go around, the little balls, everything is in each piece is unique. There are no, you could walk into a room filled with Mark's pieces, which we have, and they look sort of similar, but none of them are in any way the same. Each one clearly comes from a thought process that is unique to Mark at the moment that he does it.
Thank you. Mark, do you want to respond to that, both of their comments briefly, and then we were going to move on?
Yeah. Well, I really enjoy hearing this. You know, one of the things about an artist is that you, as Jim knows, we sit in our own little world and do what we do. And to hear this kind of reaction is really quite wonderful. Because all of it's stuff I'm well aware of, but I don't talk about it. I don't think about it a lot. I just do it. This particular piece here that we're looking at, one of the things that is, to me, I know this, there's a technical things about this that I was trying to come to terms with, bringing that orange disc down below and then having the other pieces. So the orange disc is actually a very, very heavy piece of steel. And then the blue disc above it is sort of a medium. It's got to be heavier than the three little balls, which are just an epoxy compound. And so everything is balanced in a certain way. And then I don't know if I'm going to be able to say this right, but there is a balance in the color. There's a rhythm and a balance to the color. I needed that disc at the bottom, that ring at the bottom or in the middle, to have not just physical weight, but bring your eye to it and have it really stand out. And so that's why when I played with the colors, I ended up with that color combination. So I just wanted to kind of point that out, that's something that most people don't really think about when they look at my work, but it's very much a part of it.
And Mark, thank you for the mentioning the balance, because every single piece, it's the nature of mobiles, has to balance. And we think of balance in terms of weight, as you were just describing, but there's the balance of visual balance and a color balance that occurs with that weight balance. And that's a part of every one of these pieces.
Right, that's true. And especially as I go on, the further I go along working, and that's the beauty of having this connection with Pucker, with Bernie and Sue and the gallery, is that because sales are regular, thank God, I'm allowed to just keep playing, and it's amazing. It's just amazing.
So I just want to give a small caveat. This is not a religious activity, Mark. So I appreciate your thanking God, but we can move on.
No problem.
Okay, good. Just to give you one other thought from Thomas, thinking plays only a subordinate role in the creative act itself. And I think very much that we've already alluded to that. You've spoken about it. And I'd like for Jim, if he would, to speak a bit both about your friendship and relationship, and then his introducing you to the gallery and his feelings over these years of what seems to me pride and satisfaction.
Well, thank you, Bernie. You know, I first of all want to say that I'm honored to be showing alongside of Mark at this exhibition. Mark and I have known each other, it's almost 40 years, Mark.
Yeah, I know, isn't that crazy? Yeah.
When I think about your career and I think about the span of that time, when you first walked into, I was working in a small gallery in Stockbridge during the summers between teaching. And Bernie, you may recall, we made arrangements for my work to be transferred from Pucker to the gallery in Stockbridge. And so Mark became aware of my work through this gallery because we showed in the gallery Mark's jewelry at the time. And I remember, Mark, you brought in two of your small silver mobiles and showed them to me. And you were just starting to work with these forms and making the departure from your jewelry. And your jewelry had always been sculptural. They were really like studies. It's interesting, Rusty, because you mentioned the wall pieces and Mark's earrings. Those early forms of yours really feed into that. They were like studies for your wall work. So
I've never thought of that, Jim. That's
so
cool.
it's
Yeah.
So I remember you talk about really starting out and being somewhat apprehensive about starting out as a sculptor. And I remember you brought those in, and they were wonderful pieces. And you had asked if I thought it might be possible that Pucker Gallery might be interested in these pieces. So that's how it started. I think at the time, Bernie, it might have been a fax to you,
Right.
or a letter,
Yeah.
or a phone call, and the rest from there. Mark, you took off, and it's just incredible to see what you've done, to see how you've continually raised the bar with your work. You just always, with each exhibition, you take it further. And looking at even these initial pieces in this lecture, this slideshow, to see you constantly experimenting and pushing these forms into, it's the balance, as you, Rusty, you had just mentioned that, but it's also taking these risks with positioning these forms in very different ways to take us to a new place each time. So that's it. And you might have some comments, Mark, about our
This particular
friendship.
piece. And yeah, absolutely. Mark?
Um, yeah, it is interesting. Jim and I had kind of a wonderful, I mean, and Kim, and Jim's wife Kim, who you guys weren't married yet, Jim. And I went over to your house for dinner, you went to mine, and we just had a really great connection. And I think that allowed me to feel, I've always had, terrible insecurities about myself. And so it allowed me to have more confidence, I guess, and feel comfortable actually asking you that about approaching Pucker. And I don't know, just life is so interesting, isn't it? That you have these connections with people and places, and you build and you build and you grow and you grow. And I'm a little taken back actually right now, looking at my work even in pictures like this. It's like, I'm having a really great time.
So Bernie, this particular piece, Mark, the bass is a very active part of this piece.
Yeah.
Other
Yeah.
bases are structurally, but this has some sort of more of a designated role, I think, in this piece. Could you speak to that thought?
I did a piece just before it where it was just without the actual little facial features, and it was just a very basic idea of that. And I said, oh, it was meant to be a little person of some sort. But again, a nice thing about these small works is that I don't fuss over them as much as I certainly do with a large piece. it's one statement, it's one image. And so I say, you know what? Why don't I just put a face on it? And, you know, I don't have a workshop full of fancy hammers and technical things. I've got a big block of wood with indentations in it that I make myself with carving it out. And so I sometimes I think I just sort of intuitively play with things until I get an effect that I like. And it's something like that. The face was actually a lot of fun to try to make, and I did it pretty quickly and easily. And okay, so okay, so at that point I had the object. I had this person, and I said, okay, I like his arms outstretched. I think that's a very positive and affirming gesture. I think but it needs something else. So I made the little gold leaf, which doesn't quite show up in the photograph, but it's a leaf even with veins in it, a very, very fine piece of brass. And then I gold leafed that so that he's sort of holding and almost floating a leaf. So I called it the prophet because it felt that very much that way, as though the leaf was a presentation. It had this positive aura. It was almost religious. And then I wanted to give the pieces at the top something that felt ethereal, somewhat ethereal. Almost, at first I thought maybe I'd make angel wings, and I thought, no, that's too literal. So I made this, making that little piece of soldering each little piece of wire, but it's like you do that and you play with it, and I just got it to work as this ethereal little piece of sculpture that floats around him. And then it had to be balanced off by what I thought was a piece of sky. And that's it.
That's wonderful.
I point out just that little ethereal piece that you made with all the lines is curved in a way that it can swing completely around. It's not a round circle that would bump into it. It's constructed in a way that it will go all the way around and create the halo that you were looking for.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the technical triumph of it all.
Let me just add simply the relationship between you, Jim, and Kim with Thomas's quote, "When good people meet, good things happen." And exactly. I really have learned to believe that and to experience it in so many different ways. So let's move on to the next piece. Thank you. Mara, I would love your response to a non-biblical image.
Andromeda strain.
There we go. This one is very musical to me. Almost like there are little bells and chimes, and so, I always think of the music of the spheres, that the heavens move in some heavenly harmony, not to be religious, to be sort of Neoplatonic about the whole thing. But there's something about music in this piece. You've got this push from the bottom that slides you up the whole piece, and you've got this little almost Tinkerbell or tinkling bells. And again, the sky, every time there's a blue something, it's sky or sea. And you have a stationary puddle below it as well. So there are many ways of reading this. Reading it as landscape, reading it as music, and then in motion, of course, the rhythm structure starts changing, and so I think this plays into the whole idea of your show, that rhythm structures and the creation of different rhythms, even if you're not hearing the rhythms, the pulse of the rhythms in motion sort of carries through your eyes and carries into your body.
Caroline, can you put the other one up, the next one up, and have Mara speak about it in relation to the one she just spoke about? You can see it. There is a circular piece around the dancing pieces on the right-hand side of your screen. Mara, are you willing to talk about the two of them?
This is the Firebird to me. You know, Stravinsky music and the dance, the ballet russe dance. It's been done by many other choreographers as well. But you know, you have the bird is landed, the bird in flight, it's just, you know, this can be the tree and the moon circling on what's on the right side of the screen. But you know, it's that whole expression of music and mythic animals, you know, mythic beasts, as it were, the Firebird, or I don't know, a dragon. It just, and it's in motion, and it's not a literal interpretation of those things. I think of it as an embodiment of those things.
Can we go back to the one before, and then keep in mind just looking at the bases of the two, the black base in this one and then the black base in the other, and how they function very differently in relation to the moving parts of the individual pieces. So now let's look at the other one, and Mara, one more comment on the two of them.
Well, you know, one really just its shape and its weight with those two legs coming down, and the square hipness of it really reads earth to me, and this one reads
Wind.
about to lift off. Like one is rooted and one is all the potential for flight.
Yeah.
Wonderfully said. We're going to move into a piece of in sterling silver, which still brings back Mark's initial activities in jewelry, but now dealt with within the sculptural space itself. And Jim, if you'd like to speak just briefly about it, it'd be great.
Yeah, this is interesting because it does harken back to the early work, but it's a whole different world. And my response, you know, it is about the dance and movement and playful qualities, but also there's a light. The thing that's always so wonderful about your pieces, Mark, is the weightless quality. You create this sense of air. But the other thing, I after looking for a bit, it's a reference. I was curious whether you had thought of this being a reference to technology, because it seems very technical and very. It's like almost like if a Mark Davis was going to Mars on the rover. There's that quality about it too. It's very whimsical, but also that triangle in the middle. It just seems very. It's almost like this emphasis on very technical, functional type of unit there.
Yeah, no. You're absolutely right, Jim. Yes, I certainly didn't intend that, but my mind was in that mindset as I was making it. I don't know why, but it was. And you know, the triangle is just, it's just the way the light's hitting. What it is that there's a disc, and then behind the disc there's a kind of a form that that just shoots through the disc. So you're just seeing the other end. If it was a scene on its side, you would see that goes it actually pierces the disc and comes through. But even that was, and then when the little feet on it made it feel like a space pod or something. And I certainly agonized over that. Like I didn't want anything to be too, I don't know what I was. Anyway, I just felt it needed to be lifted up, and that felt right. And yeah, it is very, very much a response to technology in a way. Yes.
So
that's really good.
This seems like it's calligraphy to me.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think this photograph, more so than the others, maybe because many of your other pieces have that matte paint on them, how light, like the horizontal piece on the left at the, at the pivot point that goes across the pivot point, the way the light is
Yep.
hit that, it's very light struck. And
Yep.
then you've got the stuff that's not light struck. And so there's that quality I had talked about very first thing. You don't have the shadow work here, but you certainly, that calligraphic swoop and what gets a highlight and what gets a low light in sterling silver is very apparent even in the photograph.
Yeah, 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 yeah. It is. Making that clean line was just wonderful. Yeah, I was very happy with that.
So what Rusty indicated at the very beginning was the sort of these stabiles, and now we're going to move to the wall-mounted pieces.
Bernie, can we go
Yes,
back? Can we go
sure.
back one time, one prior to this one, Carolyn? The two things that I wanted to say before we leave these. Number one, these are what I call the medium-sized standing mobiles, and see the complexity that you can achieve based on dimension to a great extent. But part of the reason I bring that up is that your emotional response to these pieces varies. And for instance, that silver piece, it's one of the most ethereal things. I happen to have one a little bit smaller than that, and it almost disappears at moments, and then it appears suddenly because it's just silver. And if light hits it a certain way, it all of a sudden appears to you, and other times it almost disappears. So part of the experience of Mark's work that's so incredible is that it's a very different experience as you encounter different size pieces, different colored pieces, etc. For me, just because I come from a medical background, this big circle looks to me like an egg with its DNA undone. And
I like that.
in
Yeah,
that egg,
yeah,
once it's put together, it creates a form, and
yeah,
that's the form on the other side. So
yeah.
it's what you bring to the piece, but the piece invites interpretation, and
Yeah.
that's the joy of it.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
we're
Thank you.
moving on, and I think we can move on again with a quote from Thomas, which certainly segues beautifully from what Rusty said, that skill and art are not the same thing. The only real measure of art is astonishment. And what you're saying essentially is, Rusty, when you come to it, you're in a way astonished, you're engaged by it in a way that you didn't in any way anticipate, and it makes it even more wonderful. So these wall-mounted pieces are, I think, in many ways, Mark's contribution to or extension of what his admiration for Calder and others has been about. And he's now beginning to create of a vocabulary of images and shapes and forms, and then sharing them as if they could be a painting, meaning that they're filling a rectangular space generally. And at the same time, they have all the openness, all the delight that comes from the earlier pieces that we've seen so far. And people continue to enjoy them. Also important to mention what Mara did before is that generally speaking, when these are shown, there's a little bit of a shadow to the far left, but in general, the shadows of the piece become integral to the experience of seeing it. So I'm going to ask Mark to speak just a bit about these pieces in general, and then we'll move on.
This piece in particular was actually in my house. I don't usually have my own work in the house, but this piece I had created for the hallway, and it was the big moon or sun shape, and the wires, just the wires themselves, and it just sort of, it was very ethereal. It didn't take up a lot of visual space for me. It was just more simple. But what do we have for the next piece? I wanted to sort of compare them.
Okay.
Is the next one okay?
That's the cover.
Yeah, yeah. On this one, you know, I have trouble with trying to explain. There were a lot of itinerations of this piece. The lower right section had been, there had been a lot more to it originally. And one of the things that I'll do sometimes when I'm working on something like this is I'll say, okay, you know, that's interesting. I like it. But when I'm adding the other sections to it, I have to pull back. I have to, you know, add more. Sometimes it's about the balance, in the actual physical balance. And if it is like say this is maybe too much production information, but the piece that's sort of a purple shape on the left side of that composition. Yeah, thanks. That needed to be added to. I needed something to balance the actual hanging of the piece. So I said, okay, I need to actually put something there. What will be right? And that was exactly right. And I was so pleased. And then so much of this is energy movement. That gave me that section there at the lower right. Gave me some gravity. It gave me something sort of firm and solid. And then from there, I wanted to spray out, and so I gave it those little rays of light. And then I haven't used black except for background in most of my work. And this time I wanted something very, very strong, but not thick. I wanted lightness. And so that's what I came up with. I came up with those black shapes. And then and then I needed something to, so, you know, that's how I think and I work. I wish I could say that I had more intellectual thoughts about it. That's the stuff that goes through my actual mind. Looking at it now, I just say, it's a nice, interesting composition, and it works very well. For me, I'm incredibly happy with this piece.
So we're going to go back and have Mara speak about that, and then we'll then skip over this one.
Okay.
Good.
Oh.
Thank you, Mara.
You're
Sure.
welcome. So even if I didn't know the title of this, the Cape Codder in me is, oh, I'm by the sea.
Yeah.
And what I'm very interested in, and I know that Rusty lives with one of these, and some of them are later on. This has quite an expanse. 33 inches is pretty. You know, it's a yard wide, and it's 2 feet tall almost. But it's only 11 inches deep from whatever piece has pulsed forward on the mobile section of it. That's certainly not enough room for it to have this centrifugal or centripetal force or circling that the pivot points of the hung mobiles or the stabiles with the mobile sections that we've been talking about. So if I look at this as the photograph, which is how it would mostly, if it's in a hallway or it's over in a mantelpiece or it's in a niche somewhere, it's a shallow relief. 11 inches is not particularly deep. So you need to read it almost as a painting as you encounter it when it's still. And this has a very, strong background that gives you that sense of the ocean. It's got a piece that gives you the sense of seaweed. It's got the sun rising. It's got these fish shapes. It has its own rhythm and pulse statically, and it's got this beautiful, again, calligraphic, thin, drawing lines across it. So the hand of the artist is completely evident. The weight and the balance of it's completely evident. But what I want to throw over to Rusty is, how do these actually move when they're installed? I mean, how much motion, how much twirling, how much is just the subtlest little shimmer across space?
we'll have an opportunity to discuss that more in just a couple of slides, but I think it's a critical and important discussion to have.
Perfect. Then we can do the cover piece and then move on to the hanging piece. But we did want to spend a reasonable amount of time, which I think we have. The next one, please, on these wall-mounted pieces, because they really do provide an extraordinary opportunity to introduce color, shape, and form without creating an entire area of a rectangle as a painting that limits the shadow interplay with the object itself. So let's look at the next one, which is the hanging piece, and really quite extraordinary. These, I would argue, are probably the most difficult things to photograph in terms of scale and size, as you can see. The measurements were 60 by 51 by 51, so it's enormous, hanging down. And there's another piece that we've had in the gallery for many years that has prompted a vast number of commissions simply because of the scale of it in terms of having enough space to show it. But I'd like you, Mark, again, just to speak about using this idea of mobiles. All this moves, so if your eye can see it moving around slowly, the cups with the gold leaf on the bottom of it also create a wonderful energy. If it were in a stairwell and you were seeing it coming up and coming downstairs, it would certainly be an added delight. So Mark, if you want to speak briefly about the creation of these hanging pieces, and that there are two of them, and then we're going to move on to the idea of a commission in a space.
Yeah, the first thing to bring up is that, of course, when I was a kid, I mean, really in my early teens, I had discovered a book on Calder, and I just started creating some of, especially this one piece was the first thing I did, was called Snow Flurries that he had done, and it was just little white dots with black wires. And but it was in 3 sections, and so I was doing that kind of work, and that was hanging. It hung over my parents' bed. It was glued together with glue that it fell apart in the middle of the night and cracked them on the head. It was very interesting. But so as the years went on, I played more with some, it's hard to explain. I think I'm much more, Calder was, I shouldn't compare myself quite so much with him, but I can't help it. He was a mechanical draftsman, a mechanical engineer. And that was his brain. That's the way his brain worked. And so the beginnings of his work were technical. They also were spiritual. But what I've been doing and getting better and better at it, and getting more and more into the idea of sculptural objects that move. So I'm still using those basic principles that he came up with, which were amazing that he came up with them at all. And I'm turning it into a sculptural object. So the whole part that in the picture that's on the left, actually it goes all the way down, but it looks almost like a separate section in the photo, but they actually all move really nicely together. Each side has a different color to it. So as you're walking under it, or if it's moving around below you, above you, you'll see the shapes change and the color changes along with it. The composition changes. And that's really important. And it's labor intensive in terms of making it and keeping it in the workshop for quite a while, many days, maybe even a few weeks, to keep fine tuning it, to get it to really be interesting and exciting from every aspect as it's going around. And so now I've got this beautiful moving object with all the dimensions that it has to it. And as in my mind, a poetic discovery, I don't know where I came up with the hanging pieces. That's very labor intensive. They're all on strings. They all have to form some sort of a composition or a sort of form of some sort, and look really interesting from all angles. So the ones that appear on the top are actually higher up, and they sort of form as you're going by it. It forms a curve, a kind of a triangular curve, and I find it incredibly satisfying. Guess that's it.
Let me just add the quote of Thomas's, which I love and I think is appropriate, especially with your references to Calder, but also to Miro, Matisse, others who have been part of your personal journey. Artists fight against tradition when they have nothing to add to it. And I think what we're seeing and what you're articulating is you're being inspired by these ancestors or predecessors, and at the same time continuing to grow artistically as you find your own voice. We're going to look at the next hanging piece again and see how you're using both shape, form, the piece with the lines in it, all that need to move together because you're creating a three-dimensional painting in a very special way. And I'd ask Mar, you have a time constraint, so I don't want to impose on you too much, but I'd love for you to respond to this.
I've still got a little bit of time. But this one's so jazzy to me. Part of it is the open work piece that's on the far right. And it also has, it's almost like a shield shape. It's clearly not flat. It's a shield shape. So the internal curve of that and the egg shape above it, obviously, you can see how they're going to work together. But just like on the Prophet, when you opened up that sort of almost, tropical leaf shape or angel wing shape or cloud shape on the top, just the rhythm structure has yet another dimension to it. It's different than all the other shapes that are solid shapes here, and it's sort of off to the side a little bit. So there's a little syncopation going on, both within the whole black structure and then the black structure to the gold leaf structure or brass leaf structure down below, and then this one little counterpoint of a crimson berry kind of color in there. And so this one has just these much more sort of swooping lines as opposed to tension lines. I don't know, there's just some sort of wonderful whoosh to the work. And then there's the trill going on down in the bottom. But I think of this as a very jazzy, rhythmic piece. And I don't know, that stark sort of black, white, gold, and then of red, it's pretty sexy, I think.
That's lovely.
The best compliment.
It's lovely. Caroline, do you want to just respond to this particular piece as well? I'm sorry, I didn't ask you before. I realized that there's a lot of responding to works, and you obviously bring a wonderful perspective.
Oh, thanks, Mr. Pucker. Yeah, I'd love to. I think the ceiling works are my favorite of Mark's, just because because I want them in every room in my house. But what I love about Mark's work is that he mentioned, he's like, well, that's how I make it. That's not I don't necessarily have I don't think of this and then I just push through that. He really works with his material and to make something that it's just beautiful. I don't think there's a lack of integrity to that. I think that's what art really is, and that's what these are really just so pure distilled art to me. There's specific format. This is really not a lot of people do this, and we reference Calder a lot because he's the one a lot of people know the name, and of course Mark's been influenced by him. But unlike Calder, I think Mark's has this non-engineering. It's more intuitive, even though these are very engineered pieces. They're much more nature and natural. And I think the pieces, even though of course the gold might look like a leaf, it looks more like that because of what Mark has brought to it and worked with it rather than against it. That's not to say he probably doesn't tussle quite a bit with his media. There's the part of art making, make something so beautiful and effortless, but you kind of have to wrestle with it quite a lot. And I bet it sounds like Mark does. And this piece is just, I mean, it's such a feat how many joints there are. I'm sure it took a lot of time.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
That's a
It's
very,
worth it.
but
Thank you.
also very helpful perspective as we move on to the idea of commissions and spaces and places. One of the hazards of having a gallery is to offer the possibility of a commission and realize that the artist cannot, is unwilling, will not listen to the people that are creating the opportunity for this commission. And the nice thing about the working with Mark and clients and patrons who are interested in commissions is that they become friends, that Mark listens carefully, at the same time creates out of his own spirit what he feels is wonderful for the space. And it has been just an absolute joy. I've counted, Mark, maybe you will one day, that probably there have been at least 40 or 50 commissioned pieces that have brought enormous pleasure and joy to the people that you have created it for, and many of them have become friends of yours by way of introducing Rusty and his living room and the commission piece that's there.
So first, let me say that there is in music, especially in jazz, this whole concept of developing one's own voice. And Bernie just used the term his own voice. And although there may be many influences in Mark's life, he certainly has his own voice. And it's demonstrated time and time and time again. And that's really what you want. That's the authenticity that Carolyn's talking about. It's your own voice. And in terms of creating artwork, your own voice stands out well above any, around, above, however you want to look at it, any of the influences that may have been part of how you got to where you are. Part of Mark's magic is his ability, and he showed us as he spoke today how difficult it is in some ways to articulate a process that's going on in your brain in words and communicate it. But there is something that happens in his brain that synthesizes these various pieces in ways that are just wonderful to appreciate. And his ability in terms of doing a commission, at least for us, was our living room, and you see the piece over the mantle. Mark came to our home and he looked at what it was that, what was the area where this piece would lie or rest or be hung in this case. What were the colors? What colors did we like? If you look out those windows, we have a wonderful, amazing garden, and we wanted to capture some of the feeling of the plants, the trees that were in the garden that come through those windows. So this is a long view of the living room. There's a wonderful painting on the right that had coloration in it that got captured. And if we go a little closer, Carolyn, we'll see, yeah, you can see it a little bit now, a little bit closer and a little bit more of the composition. Mara was talking about living with a piece that hangs from the wall, not from the ceiling and isn't supported, but hangs from the wall. And indeed, it's a little hard to see with this light, but in the light at night, when you have projected light on it, there are wonderful shadows behind it. And there is movement. It's subtle movement. And we'll get a little closer look at this piece in just a second, but the movement is not circular. It is more out and back in a way, but it's a vibrant movement. And this is a painting that moves, and not one that you would think, you know, let's paint something and make something mechanical out of it. This is a combination of colors that are just wonderful for the room. It has a sense of leaves that move, which are right outside your window. When the wind blows, you see that, and a little bit of movement here, and between the shadows and a little bit of movement and the coloration, it's just the most comfortable piece to live with. You walk in our living room and you feel like, oh gosh, that just belongs there. It feels so good. So it was a wonderful process of Mark coming to the home, looking, sending ideas. He's certainly open, but mostly I would want him, and he did, to do his thing, to integrate the color, the feeling, what we're trying to capture, and you couldn't ask for something better. Let's look at it up close, and you can see specifically both form and coloration. So the blue on the right picks up the blue in a painting. There's lots of green because there's lots of green, very subtle, lighter greens and yellows in a room. And then off to the left is where you go out the window into the trees. And so here you have no specific, this isn't a leaf, but it's certainly, yes, it is leaves. There are leaves right in below you. It's not a branch. I mean, is that a little butterfly? Is that a little bit of the sky? Is that a little bit? Doesn't matter. These are just wonderful, wonderful pieces. And you see where they're hung and where they're articulated, and they will, with a little, you can touch them or you can put a little wind to them. They will vibrate, if you want to think of it that way, back and forth. But again, just a wonderful way of capturing, in something I would never be able to envision myself, some essence of what it feels like to be in that room, and then just be a piece that you can enjoy. So Mark, thank you very, very much. It's marvelous.
Thank you, Rusty.
Bernie, before I sign off, I'd like to speak about this piece just
Sure.
Briefly. It's just beautiful, and it's just beautiful in situ. Two things. I mean, he calls it a casual stroll, and Rusty alluded to the fact that they wanted the inside of their garden brought inside. If you didn't tell me what this was, I would have called it a pastoral. Just the same way Beethoven, when you hear the pastoral, you are out in a landscape somewhere. When you look at this, you are out in a landscape somewhere. But the one thing we haven't really talked a lot about today that I find absolutely fascinating about Mark's work is the paint and the color and the shading of the color and the enhancing of a curve or the attenuation through color of the shape of the piece, the leaf, or the metal substructure. And just what a subtle painter Mark is as well.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
I think that's very important because initially Mark was introduced to us as a jeweler who works in sterling silver, works in gold leaf, is comfortable with somewhat semi-precious materials. And my sense was in the beginning, and it happened also with an artist named Samuel Bach, who worked in earth tones, that they didn't have a good color sense. And the joy has been the discovery of their wonderful color sense, and how, in Mark's case particularly, it is sought after with each piece he creates. It's not just accepting what first color relationships he's established and then bringing them together as this piece does, or the last piece that we're going to look at, which we can move to actually. Perfect. And so, Mara, I just want to thank you. I know you have to leave, but we're going to stay here and talk about the landscape with Bird.
Okay, always a joy, everyone. Be well. Everyone out there in cyberspace, be well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mara.
I wanted to begin the conversation about this last piece with another quote of Thomas's, with the difference between the process of art and the process of craft is that in art, the chief characteristic is joy. The chief characteristic is joy. And Jim, I know that you have in your own works created pieces that bring joy, pleasure, contemplation to people. So I'd like for you to speak briefly about this, and then we'll just go around and thank Mark.
Thanks, Bernie. Yeah, this piece, like the other wall pieces, I feel, Mark, you've really broken out from the ideas of your influences with Calder. I mean, that's been such a strong part of your upbringing, that really you're defining yourself in a greater way with these and taking us to a new place. And I really admire the way you're using paint. And I was curious whether you've actually brought the paint into your pieces through commissions, or was that something that just evolved? Because you're a sculptor, but you're also a painter. I think that these wall pieces really bridge the two worlds together beautifully.
Thanks, Jim. Thank you. That's really nice. That's so nice to hear it. It was quite a long time ago when I was, as Bernie says, I was just, and as you remember, Jim, when I brought the still, I didn't remember that they were sterling pieces, but that makes sense. And I was, for a while there, I just used spray cans, and I was doing, red, like Calder, red, white, black, maybe some yellow, maybe some, but nothing very sophisticated. And I was using them as more to divide the little pieces of sculpture that were moving around each other. But I finally bought an airbrush, thanks to a friend that helped, sort of teach me how to use it. And I did one medium-sized piece and brought it into Bernie and said, I don't know. I don't know color. I realize I don't know color, and I actually the main thing that I did to learn was just to go through my Van Gogh book and really look and study how he worked with color and form too. But and so I brought this one little piece in, and I said, Bernie, this is a test. And I said, I really don't know a lot, but I'm trying. This is my first attempt. And he said, don't learn, and just keep going. And I thought that was the best advice anyone had ever given me, because he was right. Just keep working at it, keep playing with it. And what I'm noticing now, just in the last few years, is that yes, since then I have been working with color, but now at this point, and like you said, some of that does come through commissions. When I remember this woman wanted so badly for me to do all sort of blues and greens, and then she said, I've got this rug in the next room with this sort of rusty peach coloring to it. She said, can you somehow put that in there? And I thought, oh no, that's a horrible idea. But I thought, I'll give it a try. And I realized that through, as you know, through gradating, giving it that rusty color, but and maybe adding a touch of orange to the edge or something that's almost imperceivable to the eye, but it's there. And that brought it into the other colors and sort of made it actually connected, and it came out great. So yes, there's been times like that when I really push myself and stretch. But now what I'm noticing is that I focus a lot more on the subtlety of all color and gradation. So yeah, I think that's what you're talking about.
And Rusty?
What's the quote, Bernie, that I think don't go without it? The primary act of creativity is what? Risking and...
Well, I'm about to use that for the final thing, so you have to make something else up.
I preempted you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
I had one question, Mark, just quickly.
Yeah.
In this particular piece, there are lots of shapes. And do you envision the color of the shapes? Do you envision the shapes and then think about color? How do you put the two together?
It's not quite that, but no, I think I start out more with the balance, the visual balance of the structured pieces. So, okay. And then once I have established sort of a basic outline of, okay, I've actually created that shape, I've got that shape, I've got that shape. Then I kind of start to work with the push and pull.
Gotcha.
And that's when, and then sometimes that shape on the left, I'll say, oh, because I want that to be a lighter thing with a sort of maybe some deeper edges, but I'm going to get rid of that shape because it really didn't work. And I've got a pile of things that didn't work for that piece, for that idea. It just, or it worked, but it didn't, I wanted to change it. So sometimes I'll just, that piece on the bottom left was from something else that I had discarded. And I said, this is the perfect way to start this piece, because I knew I wanted this piece to have looking at it now, it has a Kandinsky feel, meaning sort of piece, disjointed pieces that somehow work in harmony.
So I just would point out that first of all, thank you for your honesty. You have told us and struggled with the words to say, how is it that I create? And that's not an easy thing for an artist to ever do. And you've tried desperately hard today and done a great job in doing that. But
okay.
The idea of bringing things out in this way and showing us sort of how it can come together has been fabulous. And I really appreciate your as I said, your open honesty. This is something, creation, well, most importantly, I think, Mark, is that what your conversations today come down to is your desire to create something. It's an experience. It's not a particular color. It's not a particular shape. It's an experience. And much like probably Thomas with his pots that he broke ones that didn't work, he couldn't redo them. You can.
Yeah.
You have something that ultimately, when you're best done with it, if you're ever done, but you try to get done, it's something that you feel, not something you see or that matches this or the other thing. And that's what we connect to. It's because you have an emotion in it, we're capable of getting emotion out of it. So all these ideas about structure and color and things are important and very interesting. The ultimate, as the piece in my living room, it's an emotion, it's a feeling. And that's what you're after. You're waiting for that feeling to say, yeah, it's right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for seeing that.
Very beautifully said, Rusty. Let me thank everyone and also give the full quote that we were talking about before, which is risking and dreaming are primary acts of creativity that Thomas wrote. So I have to be fair to him. And generally, I read those quotes because he didn't like to have somebody put a comma in any of his written materials. So get it right. Risking and dreaming are primary acts of creativity, which was a quote I had wanted to share related to Mark's work, because I think that, Mark, what you have managed to do is to continue to put yourself out there, to put yourself at risk in terms of your creative process. And in the same activity, been astonished many times by what you have been able to do, learning from that and then going on to the next and the next and the next piece. You don't create 1,000 pieces and have them find homes and bring joy to people unless they are authentic. So your ability to stay in touch with that who you are and that spirit who is you is being shared and enjoyed. So whether we call this All That Rhythm or Joy of Movement, all those titles are appropriate because the work you have created has in fact enriched many people's experience of the daily life that they are part of. So thank you. Thank everyone for being with us. It was a joy.
It really was. Thank you so much.